Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Anonymous Hedgehog podcast. My name is Rich,
And I'm Maya.
and today we're going to be talking a little bit about parenting, which is an interesting topic considering we're like pretty young and we're not even near the age of being parents. So, any of our opinions are going to be totally on the side of like us as kids and us as the people being parented, which is, I guess, it's an interesting twist to like forming an ideology of how you're going to parent in the future.
Have you ever, yeah, that's interesting that you say, because we are both like on the younger side. We wouldn't have kids like anytime soon. So, but do you ever like find yourself saying, like, oh, I'm not going to be like my parents? But then you like, I found that I say this sometimes, but then the more that I like grow up, the more I realize I'm so much like my parents. And it's like
Yeah.
kind of disturbing to me. I think I had this realization that like, I said something and I was like, wow, like that sounded so much like something my mom would say. And it just like really freaked me out because I was like, every kid grows up saying they're not going to be like their parents. But the reality is like kids are like so much like their parents. And it's like kind of crazy.
Yeah, yeah, that book that I always mention, Mindsight, it went through like the story of how a child who was abused grew up to be a parent who would then abuse his child. And like that is so, so common because you see children being treated badly or good, like, or in a good way by their parents. And you would think that being treated badly makes the child recognize that they were treated badly and it makes them a good parent, but it actually does the opposite because it's like, oh, like I was treated like this as a child, so I should also treat my child like this because they deserve that. And like that's how parents should be.
Yeah, I think that you see that also with like bullying. Like the people who are bullied are more likely to become bullies in the future.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's probably because that they don't really have I think that they strive to become good parents, but they probably just don't have an example to look up to. Like they don't have an example of what good parenting looks like. And this is why people talk about like single mother households or like people that grow up without a father, like it's damaging to the child because they don't have that role model to look up to. And so that's kind of what like leads them like off the rails and like
Yeah. Yeah, and that's interesting that you mentioned like single mother versus single father because there's a huge difference between how a child is raised depending on which parent raises them. And like I mean there's so many studies that say like that masculine figure and that feminine figure are needed to craft a child with, like an equal set of values. I guess it's like it's interesting to think about like would it be possible to give a child both those masculine and feminine values, even if you're just like a single parent that's a man or a woman.
I think that it's possible, but I feel like it's very rare that it'll come from you. Like it'll probably come from like an uncle. If you're a single mother, you like if your brother is like, usually around the house and like whatever, then I think that people who are single parent like families, like they should probably make like an effort to kind of introduce that other side because I mean, you can really try to play the other role and I know like there are obviously a lot of single parent households that are successful and they have good kids, but like I think that yeah, those kids don't have like the opposite gender role model, right?
Yeah.
So I think that they should probably like try to like actively try to introduce that into their lives, whether it's like an uncle or just like a family friend or something like that.
That's yeah, I think that's true too, like the whole substitute thing. Like honestly, I feel like a lot of like older male YouTubers to me are like second fathers. Like I mention a lot like Jordan Peterson, and the things he says and like almost all the comments on his like latest YouTube videos have been like, oh, this man has been my second father. And so I think it's especially now in the technology age, it's so easy to be parented by people who don't even know you, which is such a crazy concept to me.
That's so weird that you think about it like parenting. Like I don't think I have like YouTubers that I would think about as like that I would feel such a close relationship with that I feel like they are my parent, like my second mother, my second father. For
Really?
me, it was mostly just like older like people that I knew in real life, like teachers or like kind of mentors that I had that I do feel like are like my second mother or my second father.
In
But I
real
don't
life.
yeah, like real life, but I don't think I have ever had that kind of connection over just seeing them in a video because
I see.
it's just like I don't actually know who they really are almost in a video because you only see like one side of them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, yeah. Honestly, like what you're saying seems like it makes a lot more sense than what I'm saying, just from an outsider's perspective. But to me, like, I feel like when I watch people, not just like comedy YouTubers, obviously, but like if it's like a self-help YouTuber or like someone online talking about their mentality on how something drastically changed their life, I feel like I tend to categorize them into spheres of family. Like oh, like this guy's like similar to my older brother. I don't have an older brother, but I would think of him as mine, even though he doesn't know I exist.
That's so interesting. I feel like I watch YouTube just purely for entertainment purposes. Like I don't I guess I don't ever feel like a closeness to those people so much that I would think of them as family. I don't know. I think it really just depends on like the person. I've never like thought about that. But now that you put it that way, it's like so interesting
Yeah,
that you think
yeah.
about it that way.
Well, maybe it has to do with like how our actual parents have raised us. Like with my parents, I don't think it's never like direct lectures of how I should behave. It's more of like insinuated actions, and like I mean obviously they've taught me a lot, like a lot about, and like they're the reason I am who I am, but it's never like direct instructions, and especially like related to topics that they wouldn't touch on, like especially like minority parents will never talk about like girls, minority parents will never talk about parties, like, but those are things that you need to like learn about at some point. And so the people on YouTube or TikTok or Snapchat, whatever it is, that do talk about those things sort of end up substituting for that lack of education.
I think this is an interesting topic. Like, to what extent should parents like talk about these things? You know, like, cause I like, so in high school, like I knew parents, like not my parents, but I knew parents' friends that like literally like would just smoke weed with their kids because they wanted
Yeah.
to like introduce their kids to this without making it feel like it was bad. And my parents kind of did this with alcohol, which is just like, they they kind of acted like alcohol wasn't such a big deal. So like we would like be able to have a sip, like just like drink wine at like birthdays. Sometimes we would drink wine at family events, and it wasn't a big deal. They never really made a big deal out of it. And then so this happened to me where like when I would actually go to a party and there would be alcohol, I wouldn't really like think it was that big of a deal because I had been introduced to it like years prior. Like starting when I was like, you know, like in elementary school, my parents would just like talk about alcohol and it wasn't a big deal. So like, do you think that parents should actively kind of try to almost like desensitize their kids to these things? Because I feel like parents that actively try to like shut their kids off from these things, their kids end up like going really crazy afterwards.
Yeah, I think I'm a living example of the latter. And like I haven't reached my going crazy phase, but like I feel like I definitely could have and might in the future, just because like for example with the alcohol thing, like from the very start my parents have like if there's like a drinking scene on TV, then it's like a little uncomfortable, and if there's like drinks at a party, then it's like, oh, like don't touch that at all,
Oh,
like it's the
really?
forbidden substance. And just like if you tell a kid not to do something, they're just going to want to do it, and it's just going to build up and build up and build up, so that the moment they're free, like the moment they turn 18 or the moment they leave their house, the moment there's alcohol and the parents aren't there, they're going to try the heck out of it in an uncontrolled, unsafe way. So honestly, like I think your parents' approach is good, but there has to be a balance.
Yeah, there has to be like I think there was an actor recently who talked about like, yeah, I'm gonna like teach my kids to smoke weed or something, but like not do these hard drugs. So like
Yeah.
they know that like what drugs are like okay and like you can dabble in like a little bit, and then what drugs are just like absolutely detrimental to your health. And I think like that is a good approach to take because like educating them about the different types of drugs and like how what they will do to your body, because I think that like the biggest deterrent for like kids doing drugs is
Yeah.
like them knowing that it'll have long-term health effects. And I think that if like parents were to educate their kids like, oh, these drugs you can maybe like for example weed, like you can try a little bit and you like you won't die or whatever, but if you do like crystal meth, like you're basically dying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think like
Exactly.
that's a really good mentality because then like what I found, because my parents really didn't talk about drugs much, they only talked about alcohol, was that I don't really understand the difference between all these drugs. You know, I have to have other people tell me, and like I don't really understand like, you know, like the difference between like a blunt and like whatever. And
Yeah.
I don't really get like which one are stronger and which ones are weaker and which ones like give you like which side effects. And so I think that would have been really helpful, just so that like I know which ones are like more detrimental to my health, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Me too. And I think the reason is because my parents themselves don't know, because their parents have also sheltered them from this stuff, and so they're just stuck in the mindset of, oh, like I'm just not even gonna go near the drug world. I'm not even gonna learn about the differences between these drugs. But then like with me, like the third generation being sheltered, it's like everyone around me is doing it and I don't even know the difference. So oops, I tried crystal meth instead of weed because I didn't know. And it's like that's a huge drawback. Like you need to be able to know the difference, especially right now when everyone is doing some drug.
I think that's interesting that you say. I think that that's true. I think parents have to adapt their parenting style to the environment around them, because like our parents both grew up outside of the U.S. and so like the environment was vastly different, and so maybe like when their parents told them not to do drugs, they were just like, yeah, okay, no one around me does drugs, so like there's no point in me doing drugs.
Yeah, it's like where
But
would I
for
get
us,
them? Yeah.
like everyone around us like does drugs or like does some type of drugs, and so it's much harder for us to say like, yeah, I'm just not going to do drugs.
Yeah, exactly. The environment is, and it's hard for parents too because they don't know the environment. Like who's to tell my parents how much drug use happens and how much like people have sex and things like that. Like I'm not going to tell them that because that's an awkward conversation because they've raised me from the start to not talk about those subjects. So then there's just a vacuum of information. And there's such a big discrepancy between what they think goes on and what actually goes on, and that hinders how they can parent me.
So I kind of want to talk about the topic of like you mentioned a little bit earlier. So like dating and like, I don't know if this like, do your parents ever talk about dating?
No, it's another forbidden subject.
Really?
It's like sometimes I will mention like, oh, like him and his girlfriend. But even that is uncomfortable for me to
Oh
say.
yeah. My parents be like, he's a girlfriend, or like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a weird, like, it's a
Yeah.
weird situation to have.
Like I'll say like him and his girlfriend and my mom, and then when my mom refers to the girl, she'll be like, oh, his friend, because they can't physically get themselves to say that word.
I think the funny thing is people like make this joke about minority parents, or at least Chinese parents, and like they forbid their kids to date up until like college or whatever.
Yeah.
But then after college they want you to get married and have kids like right away. and then you're like, what do you expect me to do?
Yeah, like how do I find one? That's so funny.
It's so funny. Like I feel like Chinese parents, especially like once you get to like maybe 23, 24, like they're like, yeah, where's the grandchildren? You know, like where's your husband? Where's the grandchildren? And it's so weird because like it's such like a contrast compared to like
it's a huge contrast.
like 2
it's like
years
overnight,
earlier.
yeah. Like overnight, they've suddenly started asking about these things, and it just leaves the kids so confused. I don't think any of these changes should be overnight, but I also like I'm really like I've wondered this a lot. Like when I'm a parent, will I let my kids date or not? Because I know it can be a distraction, and like I'm fine with my kids like doing things like outside of my house. Like I don't care. Like as long as they're safe with it, and like but it's like, is it a distraction and will it hinder them from like growing as people?
Yeah, I think that's true too. Like, but I feel like my mentality is like your kids are gonna do it anyway. You know, like regardless of whether you tell them that they can or they can't. So you might as well like what I've always like been like. I think that parents should prescribe like boundaries that are not like overly restrictive. Like, for example, you can like date, but you can't like stay out with this person past like 11 or past 12 or whatever. So like, you know, it gives them kind of some room, but it also like restricts them to like a healthy point where like it actually won't hinder them in life.
I think so too. I think the best approach is to like you have to get down to the root concern of why like minority parents and like don't want dating in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
The reason like I at least to me my theory because I still don't know like they won't
Mm-hmm.
tell but like to me the theory is that like they don't want like girls to get in the way of like academics. And if that's the case, like I feel like instead they should be just promoting values that prioritize academics over girls without like completely shutting off girls. Because then, like again, if you shut something off, the kid's just gonna want to do it even more.
Yeah, I think what you said about providing the reasoning behind it is really interesting because in psych there's this concept called like it's like authoritative versus authoritarian parenting. And it's like authoritative, they say it's like the it's the best type of parenting where like you set like strict like you set boundaries for your kids, but you explain to them the reasons why. And so but authoritarian is just like, yeah, you can't do this because I told you you can't do it. And like you don't
Exactly.
really like kids don't really understand why they can't do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes like I understand, sometimes the reasoning is too complex for a child to understand. Like even us, like we think we're old, but really we know nothing. Like we literally know nothing. And some of the restrictions that our parents put on us, like they feel absurd, but our parents have like the experiences they need to be able to put them and not have to give us reasoning. But but honestly, like despite the cases where we're just too young to understand why those restrictions are in place, we should still get reasoning for all of the other cases.
I think that I almost would disagree with the fact that like you're too young to understand because I was listening to actually another podcast and this caller called in and was like, "Oh, what is like your best parenting advice?" And then he was like, the host was like, "Your best parenting and like one of them was like to treat your kids with like." It's like to treat their concerns seriously or to treat them with respect or something like that. It's basically like to actually like answer the questions that they have. Like if they ask you like why the sky is blue, like you should
Yeah.
actually take their questions seriously and not be like, oh, they're a kid, they don't really understand anything, they don't understand
Yeah.
science or whatever. And
Yeah.
I think that that is important, like no matter what age you are. Like I think that no matter what age you are, like besides like really, really like one or two, but like at some point, like you can kind of explain it to them in like basic terms. You know, like if the kid was like in middle school or like in elementary school, you could just say like, oh, like you hang out with like girls or with boys, like this will like hinder your future success or something because you won't have time to study. I feel like that's enough for a kid to understand.
You're right. You're right. The phrasing can definitely just be simplified. The problem comes in when justifying why you can't do something means introducing evil into an innocent child's world. Like if I have to explain to my daughter why she cannot be out alone at night, that would mean I have to explain to her like, well, these evil people exist that sometimes will do crazy things, and like just explaining that to her at that time might not be the right time for her to know that this evil exists, especially when she's so innocent and young.
That's interesting. Yeah. I didn't really think of that. It's just like you're kind of wrecking that innocence in your child's mind that like everyone is good by telling them that, oh, when you walk outside at night, there are bad people who want to do bad things to you.
Yeah, the reason why restrictions exist is to keep a child safe, which implies that if you break the restriction, you're unsafe. And so if you want to justify why there's a restriction, you have to explain to a child why they're unsafe, and that can really mess with their mental health.
Yeah. So like at what point should we kind of break I think my like break that innocence in our kid because I think that my parents, I was actually just having a conversation with them about this the other day. It's like I feel like I almost never went through that innocent stage because my parents have and they say like people say that I kind of act old, like I act like an old soul sort of because like I almost never went through that stage of innocence. Not that my parents obviously like freaked me out by saying there's like a bunch of bad people, but it's like my parents talked about things like money from a really young age.
Yeah.
And I remember I was out with like some other friends once, and I was like really young, maybe like middle school or like late elementary school, and I was like, "Wow, the gas prices here are so low." And they're like, "What are you like? Why are you talking about the gas prices?" And then I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know. My parents just always mention the gas prices. So I just notice the gas prices wherever I
Yeah.
go. And that's something that I'm
Yeah.
always aware of. And my parents have always made me so conscious about being like financially responsible. Even when I would get like let's say like money from the tooth fairy or whatever, like I would save it because my parents taught me those things about being financially responsible.
That's so funny. The gas prices story is so funny that you were
Yeah,
doing that
like
at such a
my
young
friends
age.
were like, "What?" Like, and they were just so confused. And my friends' parents that were with us, and they were just like so concerned. They're like, "Why is like this kid talking about the gas prices?"
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess what you're trying to say is that like it's never too early to talk about like adult matters, which brings about the question like why is it even important to preserve a child's innocence? Like what are they gaining by being innocent and not knowing that there's evil in the world?
Yeah, that's so true. I've never considered that. Yeah, like is there because like the truth is like innocence is like ignorance, you know? Like innocence
Innocence
is
is
like
ignorance.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
if you preserve that like way too long, like they're just going to be ignorant about the world around them. And it's just giving them a false, like you're lying to your kid, like you're giving them a false perception of reality. And like yeah, there a benefit to preserving that ignorance or that innocence just because they're a kid?
Yeah. But at the same time, like they say ignorance is bliss. So by letting your child be innocent, like it's blissful innocence because the child gets to, I guess, enjoy their childhood. It's the one time in their life that they are completely carefree. And that's what, if you asked me what do I miss most about my childhood, I would say feeling carefree. And I guess that's where the innocence comes from because if I was burdened by like I don't know taxes and criminals and like house prices and gas prices and like all of the stresses in the world that we care about now, then I wouldn't be as carefree as I was.
Yeah, I think that is important, like the carefree, but I don't think that you can like I think that you can enjoy a childhood, like, but still kind of be educated about the world. So, or like, I
Yeah.
feel like it's just like I experienced this like too. It's just like my parents were very real with me, like very early on. Like my parents would always like they wouldn't really try to shield me from their real world problems. Like they wouldn't try to shield me from their money problems, or they wouldn't try to shield me from like arguments or things like that. And so it's not that I didn't enjoy my childhood. It's just like I was consciously aware of all these things. I guess I can't say because I don't know what like I don't know what it's like otherwise. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
what the alternative is.
Yeah. Honestly, I can't even remember my childhood. Like I feel like everyone always talking about like, oh, I wish I was a kid again. And I mean, I'm still young, so I can't even be saying that, but like I don't even think like I wish I can be a kid again because I don't even remember what it was like to be a kid.
Really. I feel like I remember, but I don't like it's hard to put myself back in that mindset again. Like it's almost like we were talking about in the previous episode. Like I would never choose to go back, even though like it's like the carefreeness of it. Like, yeah, that's interesting. Like we talk about ignorance is bliss and like whatever, but it's like I would never choose to go back to that ignorance, even though like if that was like a better time, like even though I was happier, I don't think I would like if given the chance, I wouldn't like erase like all of my reality of like perception of the world now, just so I could go back to that ignorance and that innocence.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I feel like I agree, and we did talk about this
Mm-hmm.
earlier, but like it's like you're reverting to a lower version of yourself.
Mm.
Like you've updated now. And the reason I don't remember my childhood is because like for me, like my childhood is just a set of distinct memories. Like, oh, like I remember I was playing on the swing that one day and it was fun. I don't remember
Mm.
like all of the times I was like crying over like falling over and things like that. Like
Mm.
how I was extremely sensitive as a child, how um I didn't understand the world that was going on. Like I feel like you've definitely mentioned this before, but the way we recall our memories, we only focus on the positives. And like the two of us are very practical people, so I think we're a little better at like understanding that there were negatives, even though we aren't like consciously focusing on them. And so I think that's why neither of us would want to go back to experience our childhood again.
Yeah, I think it's called like rosy retrospection or something like that, where like when you look back at something, you only remember the positives of it. And I think I've definitely experienced, my memory of my childhood is somewhat similar to what you talked about. It's just like, I, I have a series of like vivid events that I remember, but like I don't remember like a continuation almost
Exactly.
like, I don't remember going to school every day. Like I remember like, playing with my friends, and I remember like this birthday party that I went to, but I don't remember all those kind of daily things that were like a burden to me, like doing my coloring homework or whatever. Like that is just like so irrelevant now. But like I remember all those memories that I made with my parents and with my friends and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. If I told you to describe a day in your life yesterday, like you would easily be able to tell me your daily routine of yesterday. But if I asked you about your daily routine 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, like it gets progressively harder, because I feel like the longer we live, the more our memories fragment into just little partitions of experiences rather than continuous like lifestyles.
That's so interesting, because I feel like now, like a trend online too is just like having a routine that you follow. Like people say like they post like my morning routine, my night routine, or
Yeah.
whatever, things like this. But the truth is these things don't matter.
Uh-huh.
Like I mean, I guess they can be beneficial to like, like keeping like a schedule or whatever. But the truth is when we look back, we don't remember these routines. We remember those vivid moments. So like should we even like should we even be bogged down by our like routine if our routine isn't like our daily routine isn't perfect? Like should we just kind of focus on making those memorable moments?
Yeah. I think that like the only moments that matter are the moments that are memorable. Like I can't think of a single isolated case when something mattered but I didn't remember it after like a couple of years. Like the only times, like our judgment of what we remember is purely based on what actually matters to us and what's significant to us. So I think we should focus on what matters, and by doing so we create like more memories that are long lasting. But I don't think that means we need to abandon like the daily routines that we have in place just because they don't matter, and they're not memorable.
That's so interesting that you say like our brain has like our its own judgment of like what is worth remembering and what is not worth remembering. Like I think people like take pictures and they write in their journals and stuff because like, oh, I don't want to remember, like I don't want to forget this memorable moment. But like if it truly was memorable, you will probably remember it.
That's true. Is there any benefit in, I guess you could call like journaling like artificially recording memories. So is there any benefit in artificially reminiscing about things that wouldn't be memorable otherwise?
I think this is like really off topic, but like I was the reason that like I think that when I started keeping a journal, one of the reasons that I thought was important is like if you were ever accused of like a crime or something, then you could like be able to remember what happened on what day. Because I remember listening to the Serial podcast, and he was saying like, "Oh, like
That's
I
so
don't
funny.
remember what happened on this day because like it was just a normal day for me, and you don't remember a normal day." Like, and that was so interesting. It was like if nothing memorable, like he was accused of a crime that happened this day, but then he was like, if nothing memorable happened on that day, and you ask me a few months later, like I'm not gonna remember a single thing that happened on that day.
That's so interesting. And it brings up so many questions. Like, if nothing memorable happened on that day, why were you living that day? Like, why would we go through ordinary days if we're not even going to remember them in the future? What's the point?
Yeah,
I
that's
remember I
so
wrote
weird.
this. I wrote like this poem for a class, and I one of the lines that I wrote was like, how can we always have out of the norm, how can we always have out of the ordinary experiences without having ordinary experiences at first? So it's like these days that are just feel like regular routines, the reason we have them is so that we can build up to out of ordinary experiences, because if everything was out of the ordinary, nothing would be memorable.
That's so interesting that you call it out of the ordinary because like then it's like it's so relative to the person. Like something like out of the ordinary for you might be completely ordinary for me.
Yeah. And something that I remember in 30 years might be something that you just completely forgot.
Yeah, so it's like the thing of like if you've ever been talking to a friend and they're like, "Oh, remember this thing that we did in like eighth
We've
grade or
had those
whatever?"
conversations
Yeah, and
like a
then you're like,
million times.
and you're like, "Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about."
Yeah.
And it's like that was so memorable to that person, but that almost makes me kind of sad sometimes. It's just like that person felt it was memorable enough to remember, but like you somehow didn't think it was important enough to recall it. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of a sad concept, honestly.
It is. I feel like I'm always on the other side of it. I'm always on the side that says like, oh, what happened? Like, oh, I said that. Like, I'm always on that side because I'm just so forgetful. But it honestly, I don't think it means I just don't care. I think it just means I have a lower threshold of memory. Like the experience was equally memorable to both of us, but my memory just like that level of memorableness just didn't make it through the threshold for me because my threshold's just lower.
That's interesting. Like, yeah, because it's so relative to each person. So, like, yeah, what's memorable to like you might not actually be memorable to me. So, like, when people keep journals, like, how do you? I think this is like, yeah, sorry, we're kind of going over time, but it's like when you keep journals, I kind of thought, like, what do you write down? If that makes sense. So, like, do you write down the things that are memorable that, or do you write down the things that are not memorable that you want to remember? Like, so, like, because when I keep a journal, I write down like what I think is memorable, but I feel like that's actually not right because you should write down the things that you think are not memorable because those are the things that you will forget.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The thing with being memorable is that it changes based on time. So something can be extremely memorable to me today, and in 10 years I'll forget it. Even though it's still just as memorable, I've just collected more memories during that time and it's sort of shoved it to the back of the filing cabinet. Which is why like for example, one of my biggest like the biggest journeys of my life was flying across the country and going on this crazy like 100-mile hike with like with my Boy Scout troop, and it was like I had never done something nearly as wild before. But if I try to remember that right now, all I remember is like a few specific memories, like the airplane ride there, and like me yelling at people to like move faster because I was like in the front, and like the time that it rained and we all had to set up our tents. Like those are my three memories. But if I kept a journal, and if I look through my journal, it is 20 pages long because I wrote
Really?
down so many memorable things during that hike. And those are things that I wish I still remembered, but I just physically can't.
That's so weird that out of like this huge experience, you remember like yelling at people to move faster. Like that seems,
Yeah.
it's like our like threshold for memory is just it's like it's not like a like it's like constantly like moving. That's what like
Always,
yeah.
always.
It's like
Yeah.
we remember like the weirdest things.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of variability in memory because one, it's subjective as to what you think is memorable. Two, it's subjective as to how memorable it's going to be in the future based on what other memories you collect later. And then three, it's subjective as to how valuable the memory is at the moment. And so like all three of those things combine to just make your memory this crazy wild place where things aren't objectively true and you aren't remembering the most important moments.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. So we'll just end the podcast here and thank you all for listening and we'll see y'all next time.